pink plus green equals really expensive special edition NR200P build. When a friend of mine had a terrible experience with a pre-built PC, like who mixes a 750 watt PSU with a 3090, Josiah?
Nobody.
That is not a good idea. Well, no, people actually do, and then they sell them, which is terrible. So she reached out to me and she asked if I might be able to help her do a custom build just for her. And I, of course, responded with, "Why didn't you call me first?" Anyway, she wanted something beefy and pink. Well, that's kind of funny, like beefy and pink, there's pink, never mind. So after some hardcore internet searching, no, not for that, I found the Sakura limited edition NR200P and I shared it with her. At first, there was silence because we were DMing and there's no point being is she wasn't responding. But then I got a large number of multicolored and very happy looking emojis and I knew I had found the one. Now, we have done a number of builds in the NR200P, like this incredible, almost perfect water-cooled one we did right here. However, I haven't really talked you through what's so great about this case. So let's do a quick overview, and by quick overview, I mean thorough overview, before we jump into the build. So for those of you who don't know, the NR200P is an SFF, or small form factor case, that has made quite a name for itself given its versatility and just how easy it is to build in this small form factor case. And that does mean something, guys. Until you've done an SFF build, you don't really know how awesome that is. Now the NR200P versus the NR200, one comes with tempered glass side panel and also a perforated side panel, while the NR200 just comes with that perforated side panel. Now the only big drawback here is that if you're going to be using the tempered glass side panel and an AIO liquid cooler, then unfortunately you're going to have to use a less than ideal orientation for your AIO cooler and more than likely have your pump at the top of the loop. Now, if you want to know more about what that means, you can check out my in-depth guide to AIO coolers right here for more on how this could be a problem and what options you may have to fix it. Now the other thing about the tempered glass is that it also means, given the clearance for the GPU, that you will be vertically mounting the GPU. And oh, and by the way, the riser cable is included, which is actually pretty awesome. Now this becomes a real issue when you get to temps, which we'll talk more about later. What am I, Italian? It's a me, Mario. We're gonna talk more about it. This becomes a real issue when you get to temps, which we will talk more about later. But man, does it look good. And if you choose the right GPU, it shouldn't be a problem. Now for motherboard support, this case supports mini ITX or mini DTX with a size of 244 by 226 millimeters maximum. For your CPU cooler support, this can do 76 millimeters if you're doing a vertically mounted GPU, 153 millimeters with the tempered glass side panels, or you get an extra 2 millimeters at 155 millimeters if you're using that nice vented side panel. For PSUs, you have 133 millimeters, which means you're either using SFX or SFXL PSUs. You aren't going to be using full-size PSUs, ATX PSUs in this build. Then finally, you can do 330 millimeter GPUs, but I'm not actually sure how accurate this is because you can see in the build that is coming up, spoiler alert, that I actually struggled to get an ASUS ROG Strix in the case, and that is at 320 millimeters, meaning I should have had 10 millimeters of clearance. Now finally, for storage, you have the option of either two 2.5-inch SSDs with the ability to either add a third 2.5-inch SSD or a single 3.5 HDD with a combo drive tray. Now for cooling, this case can support up to 7 fans if you aren't using the tempered glass panel with two 120 millimeters at the top, which they do include, which is pretty awesome. And yes, you can switch out those fans and use the same mounting mechanism as an FYI. You can do a 192 millimeter in the rear, which who uses 92 millimeters, but yes, you could if you wanted to. And you could do 220 millimeters at the bottom, slim fans if the GPU is bigger than 2.5 slots, by the way. And finally, either two 120 or two 140s at the side if you are using the vented side panel and not the tempered glass. For radiators, and yes, you could do a custom water-cooled loop in the case, you can do 92 millimeter radiator in the rear, which good luck finding that. If you're not vertically mounting your GPU, you can do 120 millimeter or 240 millimeter in the bottom. And finally, you can do 120 millimeter, either 140 millimeter, 240 millimeter, or 280 millimeter on the side if you're not using the tempered glass. There's also a built-in out-of-the-box mounting option for a pump, which you can see I used right here on our water-cooled Intel build. It's actually pretty rad, and again, you have a lot of versatility. Just quick aside, This case is actually very, very cool, and probably one of the best cases Cooler Master has ever made, aside from the weird AIO mounting issue. Lastly, and I didn't know this until now, but Cooler Master has also provided options for 3D printing feet and also PSU mounting options, which they provided the files for, which I actually thought was pretty cool. They have a bunch of different options you can download and actually customize them yourselves. And you can check out where those files are by looking down in the description below. Now I know running through all of this in a video may sound impressive, and to be honest, it really is an impressive box, but I really cannot tell you how cool until you build it yourself. Just how many options Cooler Master was able to cram into this very tiny box at only $120 USD at the time of recording. However, and this is the one thing worth noting, if you are going to do the build, the riser cable that comes with the case is a PCIe Gen 3. And that means before you do the build, you need to set up your BIOS correctly before building to make sure that this is working and everything is set up on your end. If you want to know how to do this outside of the case and at the same time ensure all your components are working, you can watch our video on test benching right here, which will basically let you set up the entire PC and do all your BIOS updating and stuff before you do it. Okay, enough of the intro, let's get to the building. We're going to be using the Ryzen 9 5900X. Because this is a mini ITX build, we're going to be using the RG Strix B550i. We are going to be using their new Corsair Vengeance RGB Pro SL. We're going to be putting 2TB SN850, and then we've got a 500 gig SN750. We're going to be doing a bottom-mounted H100i Capellix. We're using the ROG Strix RTX 3080. We might change this out. We're going to be using the EVGA 850GM. That is the build that we're going to be building today. Okay, so going from here, here is our, well, let's turn it the right way. Here's our board. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go and get our CPU installed. We're gonna just drop this in just like that, and then set it down, and our CPU is installed. It's so tiny. Let's get our NVMe in. I'm gonna go ahead and pop in our RAM here. Here it is, the beautiful case. It's pink. I'm gonna go ahead and put in our motherboard first. The AIO mounted, and then from there we can start making lots of magic start to happen. So let's get this off to the side. Let's go and open up our PSU. So now everything is basically in and plugged in. The only thing I gotta figure out now is where I'm gonna put this hub. Let's grab our GPU real quick. Okay, we're gonna choose a different 3080 and pop that in. We tried, it's a little too much. This is what we're gonna put in there for now. She can answer the question if she wants to keep this, but at least for the sake of this build, we're gonna put in a 3090. Okay, so that does actually have more room, but not a ton. That does look pretty clean. So let's get this little bit of a rat's nest still just kind of managed. We don't have a lot left to do. And What a journey. And just so you know, in the end, she did end up keeping that Vision 3090, which I think looked better and performed awesome. Let's talk about thermals though, because I alluded to this earlier in the video. We actually tested the system with both the tempered glass and also the vented glass side panel, so we could see what, if any, difference we saw with these configurations. And spoiler alert, there was a difference. So the thermals in our pretty in pink NR200P is in a slightly positive pressure configuration using Corsair QL120 fans were as follows. Man, that sounds so formal. So on our Ryzen 9 5900X at idle in all scenarios, open case, closed case tempered glass, and closed case vented side panel, we saw a nice and frosty low 40s across the board. But when we flex the CPU, this is when the story starts to get interesting. In the open case scenario, we saw a warm but safe 85 degrees, and in the closed case with tempered glass, we saw a much cooler 79 degrees. And finally, when we used the vented side panel, we actually saw a slightly warmer 82 degrees. Now this is one of those really cool places when you get to see the engineering at work, because in the closed case with tempered glass scenario, you saw a very directed airflow from the top fans having a direct and non-diffused effect on the temperatures. While in the closed case, and even somewhat in the vented side panel, you are seeing that how that lack of directed airflow isn't as effective in cooling. However, when we flip over to the GPU, we see all of this kind of turned on its head. Similar to the cooling of our Ryzen 9 5900X, our Gigabyte Vision RTX 3090 at idle, across the board in all the same scenarios, was sitting at a nice and cool high 40s. But when we start rendering pictures of new Robeytech merch, coming soon by the way, we saw another interesting story. For the open case scenario, the GPU was at a nice and moderate 65 degrees, and we added that vented side panel, we only saw a 2-degree difference jumping up to 67. However, when we put on the tempered glass panel, we saw an 18-degree difference as it jumps up to a warm but still safe 85 degrees when under load. A significant jump, and you can definitely see that the GPU is being starved somewhat for airflow. So what does this mean? Well, in the world where you want a number to be better, the best case to run your NR200P is with the vented side panel versus the tempered glass. But guys, to be honest, 85 degrees, even if it's sustained for hours, isn't going to damage your GPU anyway. So if you want it to look pretty and don't mind a little bit of additional fan noise, this is going to be completely okay as well. Now enough about thermals, let's talk about how the little peak beast takes on some games. First up, it's the single-player RTX experiences, given this is an NVIDIA GPU paired with a Ryzen 9 5900X and an Gigabyte Vision RTX 3090. For Tomb Raider running at 1440p with DLSS on the highest preset, we saw an average frame rate of about 158 frames per second across the runs we did in the game. For Metro Exodus running at 1440p with ray tracing on high and DLSS set to balance, we saw an average FPS across the board of 78.23 FPS. Nice solid numbers, and definitely showing where this build is as a gaming, albeit pink, powerhouse. But what about MP games? Well, for Apex Legends running on low visual settings at 1440p, again optimizing for competitive gameplay and high frame rate, we saw an average frame rate of 278.4 FPS across our multiple game sessions. For Call of Duty Warzone on low visual settings at 1440p, again set for competitive gameplay, maximizing for FPS, we saw a frame rate of 205 FPS. Now finally, for Fortnite, again 1440p, wanting to be as fast as possible and seriously just smashing that 360 frame per second barrier, it came in at a nice and fluid 493 FPS. That is a lot of fast Fortnite. Maybe we should have called this the Pink Behemoth build, because this PC came to play. Ultimate power, itty bitty living space, because this is so much power in a tiny space. And honestly, those temps, no issue whatsoever. This is a gaming small form factor beast. So where does that put this build, wrapping it all up? Simply, it's a hell of a build in a really small package that we may have to pay some additional attention to on the cooling side if we see potential issues pop up with the pump, given it's not in an ideal setting. From a build standpoint, the NR200P is a more than capable case, and honestly a crazy value for what you pay given other SFF cases on the market and what this case is capable of, and the sheer amount of options you have when doing a build. Cable management and heck, troubleshooting are all a lot harder in this case. And just know there's going to be a complications tax when you're working in this case. But it's just because it's small. So in the end, it's a small price to pay. Haha, small. I said small a lot. It's a small price to pay for a case that comes up big in so many ways. So what did you think of the build? Are you considering the NR200P? Why? We'd love to know all of those answers to those questions down in the comments below. Now, while you're down there, make sure you slap that subscribe button with that like button and ring that notification bell so we, or you, or all of us will get a notification each and every time a video goes live right here on Robeytech. Speaking of live, we have a live show every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday starting at 5:30 p.m. both here on YouTube and also over at twitch.tv/Robeytech. If you want to get more from us, just follow us on all the socials. You can check us out on TikTok, doing the dances, having some super cool content. We're basically talking to you live over on Twitch, or it's showing you just pretty pictures over on the gram. We also have an incredible community over at discord.gg/Robeytech. Tons and tons of people talking about PCs, talking about tech, talking about all the things that you care about, and we'd love to see you there. Anyway, guys, we hope you really enjoy this video, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.